The cruelest thing about regret is that it usually arrives wearing a tuxedo and standing under bright lights. Every chandelier inside the Grand Astoria ballroom shimmered like liquid gold above the sea of black tuxedos and diamond necklaces drifting across Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala. Crystal glasses clinked softly beneath the sound of a live jazz quartet, while camera flashes burst near the red carpet entrance every few seconds like distant lightning. Adrian Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his tailored midnight black jacket as another investor shook his hand and praised the recent expansion of Whitmore Capital. He smiled automatically, the same polished smile that had appeared on magazine covers and Forbes interviews for nearly a decade, but his attention wasn't on the conversations around him. It was on the name printed across the invitation folded neatly inside his inner pocket. Nia Brooks. The moment he had seen it 3 nights earlier, something sharp and unfamiliar had tightened in his chest. Not fear. Certainly not guilt. Adrian Whitmore didn't allow himself guilt. At least that was what he had spent the last 5 years convincing himself. Beside him, Vanessa Laurent lifted a champagne glass to her lips, her silver gown glittering beneath the ballroom lights. "You've checked the entrance 4 times already," she murmured with a teasing smile. Expecting someone important, Adrian gave a quiet scoff. Not important. But the answer came too quickly. Vanessa noticed. Women like Vanessa always noticed. Across the ballroom, giant digital screens displayed the logo for Brooks Eclat Beauty, the luxury skincare company that had exploded across the country in less than 3 years. Beauty editors called it revolutionary. Wall Street called it unstoppable. Adrian had called it temporary. Until tonight. Because tonight the woman behind it all was about to walk into a room full of people who remembered exactly how she used to look standing beside him. Quiet, nervous, underdressed for high society events. Too soft for rooms like this. He remembered one particular night in Chicago when she had accidentally held the wrong fork during a private dinner with investors. One tiny mistake. One tiny embarrassed smile. And afterward, inside the back seat of his town car, he had looked at her and said words he could still hear with terrifying clarity. "You don't belong in my world, Nia." Back then she had simply turned toward the rain-covered window and stayed silent. That silence haunted him more now than any scream ever could. A fresh wave of camera flashes exploded near the ballroom entrance. Heads turned almost instantly. The low hum of conversation softened. Adrian glanced toward the doors out of pure instinct, already expecting disappointment. In his mind, he had imagined her smaller somehow. Bitter, worn down by life. Maybe hiding behind oversized fabric and forced confidence. Maybe pretending success had healed what he broke. But then the doors opened fully, and the entire room stopped breathing. Nia Brooks stepped into the ballroom wrapped in a floor-length black satin gown that moved like dark water across marble floors. No excessive jewelry. No desperate attempt to impress. Just elegance, so effortless it silenced the room before she even took a second step. Her deep brown skin glowed beneath the chandelier light like polished bronze, and her natural curls were swept into a soft, sculpted updo that exposed the graceful line of her neck and shoulders. But it wasn't her beauty that struck Adrian hardest. It was her calm. She didn't enter the ballroom like a woman seeking validation. She walked in like a woman who had already survived the worst thing that ever happened to her and no longer feared anyone watching. Adrian's fingers tightened slightly around his glass. For the first time in years, he forgot how to speak. The silence inside the ballroom lasted only a few seconds, but to Adrian Whitmore it felt long enough to expose every ugly assumption he had carried about her for years. Nia moved through the crowd slowly, her posture relaxed, one hand lightly holding the strap of a black satin clutch while photographers angled for better shots near the entrance. Conversations stumbled around her. Investors paused mid-sentence. Women subtly adjusted their dresses as she passed. Men who once ignored her now straightened their jackets before introducing themselves. Adrian watched all of it with a strange pressure building beneath his ribs. It did not make sense to him. 5 years ago, she could barely survive one of these events without gripping his arm for reassurance. He remembered how nervous she used to become before charity dinners, standing in front of the mirror asking quietly if her dress looked appropriate enough for rooms filled with old money and political families. He had never answered gently. "You are trying too hard," he used to tell her. Confidence cannot be bought with fabric. At the time, He thought he was sharpening her, preparing her for the world he ruled. Now, standing beneath the warm gold light of the ballroom, Adrian realized the cruel truth. She had not lacked confidence back then. She had lacked safety. Vanessa leaned closer to him, her manicured nails brushing his sleeve. "That is your ex-wife?" she asked carefully, unable to fully hide the tension beneath her polished voice. Adrian did not answer immediately. Across the room, Nia had just stopped beside an elderly couple near the donor table. The woman reached for her hands warmly while the man laughed at something she said. Nia smiled softly, and the expression struck Adrian harder than he expected because it was real. Not the cautious smile she used to wear around him. Not the nervous one she gave reporters during company galas. This smile belonged to someone at peace with herself. The jazz music swelled gently through the ballroom, while waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne flutes between clusters of wealthy donors. Camera flashes reflected across marble pillars and crystal chandeliers, but somehow Nia remained the center of every moving piece inside the room. Adrian hated himself for noticing details he should not still remember. The elegant curve of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head slightly while listening, the calm rhythm of her breathing even with hundreds of eyes on her. 5 years ago, she would have looked overwhelmed in a room like this. Tonight, she looked untouchable. Then she laughed quietly at something the older woman whispered to her, and Adrian felt something inside him shift in a way he could not control. Vanessa followed his stare and forced a brittle smile. "Interesting transformation," she muttered before taking a sharp sip of champagne. Adrian barely heard her, because at that exact moment, another figure stepped through the ballroom entrance behind Nia. A small boy, no older than 5, dressed in a navy suit with tiny polished shoes and curls trimmed neatly along the sides. The child paused near the doorway for half a second before looking around the ballroom with curious dark eyes. And Adrian's entire body went still. The boy's face hit him with terrifying familiarity. The same strong jawline, the same focused eyes, even the same slight crease between his brows whenever he looked confused. The child spotted Nia across the ballroom and immediately smiled before hurrying toward her through the crowd. Nia turned at the sound of his footsteps, and for the first time that evening, her calm composure softened completely. She bent gracefully, opened one arm, and the little boy ran directly into her embrace like it was the safest place on earth. Adrian forgot the noise around him, forgot the music, forgot Vanessa standing beside him. Because the moment the child lifted his face again beneath the ballroom lights, Adrian Whitmore felt the blood drain slowly from his own. Adrian Whitmore had spent years mastering control. Control over headlines. Control over billion-dollar negotiations. Control over rooms filled with senators, investors, and journalists waiting for him to say the perfect thing. But standing beneath the chandelier light of the Grand Astoria ballroom, staring at the little boy in Nia's arms, he felt control slipping through his fingers one silent second at a time. The child rested comfortably against her side while she adjusted the sleeve of his tiny navy blazer with practiced tenderness. The gesture was small, ordinary even, but Adrian could not stop watching it, because it was the kind of familiarity that came from years. Routine. Love. Family. The boy said something softly near her ear, and she smiled again, brushing a curl away from his forehead before kissing the top of his head with effortless affection. Adrian's throat tightened unexpectedly. He could not remember the last time anyone had looked at him with that kind of trust. Around them, the gala slowly resumed its movement. Conversations restarted in cautious waves. Crystal glasses clinked again. The jazz quartet continued playing near the marble staircase, but Adrian noticed people glancing between him and Nia now. Quietly, curiously. The resemblance was impossible to ignore once seen. Vanessa noticed it too. He felt her body stiffen beside him before she leaned closer and whispered carefully, "That child looks exactly like you." Adrian did not answer, because the terrifying part was that she was right. The boy could not have been older than 5. Adrian's mind moved backward instantly, calculating dates without permission. 5 years ago. Chicago. The penthouse overlooking Lakeshore Drive. The divorce papers. Nia standing near the windows with tears shining in her eyes, while he coldly explained why their marriage no longer fit the image he needed for Whitmore Capital's expansion into elite East Coast circles. He remembered every brutal detail now with sickening clarity. People notice everything. He had told her that night, while fixing the cufflinks on his shirt. Investors want stability, sophistication, a certain presentation. Nia had stared at him for a long moment before asking quietly, "And I embarrass you?" He had not answered directly, which had been answer enough. Back then, he convinced himself he was making a strategic decision, a clean separation, a necessary sacrifice for ambition. But watching her now across the ballroom, Adrian realized something horrifying. Nia had not walked away broken. She had walked away and built a life so complete that his absence no longer mattered inside it. The ballroom lights softened slightly as the event host stepped onto the stage near the center of the room. A massive screen behind him displayed the gold Brooks Eclat logo while photographers gathered near the front rows. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced warmly, "tonight we honor one of the most influential entrepreneurs in modern luxury beauty." Applause rolled through the ballroom. Immediately, Adrian felt his chest tighten as Nia gently lowered the little boy back onto the floor and took his hand. The child looked up at her proudly while she leaned down to whisper something near his ear. He nodded seriously, and the sight hit Adrian harder than it should have. Because for one impossible moment, he imagined what those years might have looked like. Birthday candles, school mornings, tiny sneakers left near a front door, family photographs, bedtime stories, entire pieces of life existing somewhere without him. Nia began walking toward the stage with calm, measured steps, her son beside her, while cameras flashed continuously around them. No nervousness, no hesitation, just quiet grace beneath the attention of an entire ballroom. Adrian barely heard the applause anymore. He only heard one memory repeating itself inside his head with merciless clarity. "A child would complicate everything I built." He had said those words 6 years ago during an interview after a business magazine asked about family plans. At the time, Nia had gone strangely quiet beside him for the rest of the evening. Adrian never asked why. And now, standing frozen among Manhattan's elite, while the little boy with his eyes walked beside the woman he once discarded, Adrian Whitmore felt something unfamiliar begin settling heavily into his chest. Regret. The applause inside the ballroom grew louder as Nia stepped onto the stage, but Adrian Whitmore barely heard it over the sound of his own heartbeat. The giant screens behind her illuminated the elegant gold lettering of Brooks Eclat, while photographers crowded near the front rows, desperate for a better angle. Her son stood calmly beside the stage stairs with an older woman from the foundation committee watching over him, and every few seconds the little boy glanced toward Nia with quiet admiration shining in his eyes. Adrian could not stop staring at him. It was not only the resemblance anymore. It was the feeling clawing through his chest the longer he watched them together. They moved like family, like years had shaped them into something solid and unshakable while he remained completely outside of it. 5 years ago, Brooks Eclat started in a small rented warehouse in Brooklyn with only 3 employees, the host announced warmly. Today, it is one of the fastest-growing luxury skincare companies in America, now valued at over $400 million. Another wave of applause rolled through the ballroom. Adrian noticed investors nodding approvingly. Fashion executives whispered to each other, while journalists typed quickly into their phones. The room respected her now, not because she had once been Adrian Whitmore's wife, but because she had built something undeniable with her own hands. Nia stepped toward the microphone gracefully, smoothing one hand against the side of her gown as the ballroom quieted again. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice carried through the speakers with calm warmth that instantly settled the room. Adrian froze at the sound of it. 5 years had changed the texture of her confidence completely. She no longer sounded like someone waiting for permission to exist. "Success is an interesting thing," Nia continued with a faint smile. "People only notice the moment you arrive. They rarely ask what it costs to get there." A few quiet laughs moved through the crowd. Adrian did not laugh, because he remembered exactly what it had cost her once. Chicago. Winter. Snow falling outside the penthouse windows while Nia sat alone at the dining table long after midnight waiting for him to return from another investor dinner. He remembered walking inside irritated from too much whiskey and political small talk only to find she had fallen asleep in one of his sweaters beside untouched food gone cold. She woke instantly when he entered, her eyes hopeful despite the hour. "I saved your dinner," she had whispered gently. Adrian barely glanced at the table. "You should stop doing that." he muttered while loosening his tie. Doing what? Acting like this is some normal marriage. He still remembered the way her expression slowly changed after that sentence. Not dramatic, not angry, just quietly hurt. Back then he convinced himself emotional distance was necessary. Strategic. His world demanded perfection, and perfection left little room for tenderness. The ballroom. Lights reflected across crystal glasses as Nia continued speaking about entrepreneurship, resilience, and creating opportunities for women historically overlooked by luxury industries. Every word landed with controlled grace. She never once mentioned Adrian, never acknowledged him, and somehow that hurt more than public anger ever could. Vanessa shifted beside him again, clearly uncomfortable now under the growing attention surrounding Nia. Everyone is obsessed with her tonight, she muttered quietly. Adrian still did not answer, because at that exact moment, Nia's son looked toward the audience, and their eyes met for the first time. The child tilted his head slightly with innocent curiosity, studying Adrian for several long seconds beneath the ballroom lights. Adrian's chest tightened painfully. It felt like staring into a smaller version of himself from decades ago. The same eyes his mother once called stubborn. The same guarded expression he wore in old childhood photographs before wealth hardened everything softer inside him. Then the little boy smiled politely before turning back toward the stage again, completely unaware that he had just shattered something inside the most powerful man in the room. The applause lingered long after Nia stepped away from the microphone, but Adrian Whitmore remained motionless near the back of the ballroom, his untouched drink warming slowly in his hand. Around him, wealthy donors and executives resumed their conversations with renewed energy, yet one name floated repeatedly through the room, like a current pulling every voice in the same direction. Nia Brooks. Brooksiclaw. Visionary. Brilliant. Inspirational. Adrian swallowed slowly as each word landed heavier than the last. 5 years ago, those same people barely acknowledged her existence when she stood beside him at events exactly like this. Back then, she was simply Adrian Whitmore's wife, the quiet black woman trying to survive rooms designed to make outsiders feel small. And Adrian had helped those rooms succeed. He remembered one particular gala in Boston during the final year of their marriage. Nia had spent nearly 2 hours getting ready inside their hotel suite, carefully adjusting the emerald green gown she had bought herself after saving for weeks. Adrian barely looked up from his phone when she walked out of the bedroom. Too much, he had said flatly. What? She asked softly, her hand instinctively touching the fabric near her waist. The dress. The earrings. The hair. You are trying too hard again. He still remembered the silence that followed. Nia slowly removed the earrings first, then the bracelet, then the smile she had carried moments earlier. Adrian convinced himself at the time that he was protecting her from judgment, but the truth was uglier than that. He was protecting himself, protecting his image, protecting the approval of wealthy men who whispered behind champagne glasses about interracial marriages while pretending to admire diversity in public. Adrian closed his eyes briefly as the memory settled like poison in his chest. Across the ballroom, Nia now stood surrounded by investors and reporters near the donor wall, her son resting comfortably beside her while she answered questions with effortless calm. Every movement she made carried quiet authority. She no longer shrank herself to make powerful people comfortable. And watching that transformation forced Adrian to confront something he had avoided for years. He had not destroyed her confidence. He had underestimated her strength. Mr. Whitmore. Adrian opened his eyes as an older investor approached him with a broad smile. I had no idea you and Ms. Brooks were once married. Remarkable woman. Adrian forced a tight nod. Yes, she is. The investor chuckled warmly. You must be proud seeing what she built. Proud. The word hit Adrian strangely, because pride was not what filled his chest while watching her tonight. It was grief. Grief for every cruel sentence spoken carelessly across expensive dinner tables. Grief for every time she looked at him hoping for softness and found criticism instead. Grief for the years he lost without even realizing what they were worth. Near the stage, Nia bent down slightly as her son tugged gently on her hand. The little boy whispered something against her ear that made her laugh quietly again. Adrian stared at them, with growing disbelief because he could see it clearly now. The child adored her completely, not out of obligation, out of safety, trust. Love earned slowly over years Adrian never witnessed. The ballroom lights reflected softly against the marble floors as waiters passed carrying silver trays filled with desserts and champagne. Somewhere near the orchestra, someone laughed loudly at a political joke. Camera flashes continued exploding near the press wall. Manhattan's elite moved elegantly through the room as if nothing life-changing had just occurred. But Adrian felt like the entire world around him had shifted permanently. Then suddenly the little boy looked toward him again. This time he studied Adrian longer before quietly asking Nia something. Adrian could not hear the words from across the ballroom, but he saw Nia's expression change almost instantly. Her shoulders stilled slightly. Her fingers tightened around her son's hand for the briefest moment. Then slowly, very slowly, she turned her eyes toward Adrian Whitmore. For a few long seconds, neither of them moved. The ballroom continued breathing around them with soft music, polished laughter, and the constant shimmer of camera flashes, but Adrian Whitmore felt completely disconnected from all of it. Nia's eyes held his steadily from across the crowded room, calm and unreadable beneath the golden chandelier light. There was no anger in her expression, no bitterness. Somehow that made the moment even harder to survive. Because hatred would have been easier. Hatred would have meant he still occupied enough space in her heart to wound her. But the woman standing across from him now looked like someone who had already healed from everything he once broke. Her son looked between them curiously, his small hand wrapped securely around hers. Adrian noticed the way she gently brushed her thumb against the child's knuckles as if grounding him without words. Protective, instinctive. The movement tightened something painfully inside Adrian's chest. Then Nia did something he never expected. She gave him a polite nod. Nothing more. No dramatic confrontation. No scene. Just the kind of distant acknowledgement reserved for strangers passing each other in expensive rooms. Adrian felt the weight of that small gesture more deeply than humiliation. Because once upon a time, she had looked at him like he was the center of her entire future. And now she looked at him like a memory she had already survived. Vanessa shifted impatiently beside him. "Are you seriously not going to say anything?" she whispered sharply. Adrian barely heard her. His attention remained fixed on Nia as she guided her son toward a quieter section near the donor tables away from the cameras. The child glanced back once more before leaning close to whisper something that made Nia smile faintly again. Adrian's stomach twisted unexpectedly. He wanted to know what the boy's voice sounded like. Wanted to know what cartoons he watched on Saturday mornings. What subjects he liked in school. Whether he hated vegetables or loved basketball or slept with the hallway light on at night. The realization struck Adrian with terrifying force. Entire pieces of another human being existed carrying his blood while remaining completely unknown to him. A server approached holding a tray of champagne, but Adrian waved him away distractedly. Across the ballroom, reporters had already begun quietly circling near Nia again. He noticed phones lifting subtly, photographs being taken, conversations building momentum online in real time. Manhattan society loved nothing more than beautiful scandals wrapped in elegance. And tonight the story practically wrote itself. Billionaire executive discovers former wife built an empire while secretly raising a son who looked exactly like him. Adrian loosened his jaw slowly, already imagining tomorrow's headlines. But strangely, for the first time in years, his concern was not reputation. It was regret. Deep and corrosive and impossible to silence. 5 years ago, after the divorce papers were finalized, Adrian remembered standing inside his empty penthouse staring at the untouched coffee mug Nia had forgotten beside the sink. The apartment had looked cleaner without her things. More polished. More controlled. Exactly what he claimed he wanted. Yet the silence afterward had unsettled him in ways he never admitted aloud. No music in the kitchen while she cooked late dinners. No soft humming from the bedroom while she folded laundry. No warm light beneath the office door when he worked too late. He buried himself in expansion deals and interviews instead of examining why success suddenly felt colder than before. And now, seeing her tonight beneath these glittering lights, Adrian understood the truth he had avoided for half a decade. Nia had never been too small for his world. His world had simply been too shallow to deserve her. A sudden burst of applause near the stage pulled him from his thoughts as another speaker took the microphone. But Adrian barely noticed. Because at that exact moment, the little boy slipped gently away from Nia's side and wandered toward the dessert table nearby. One of the event coordinators smiled warmly while handing him a small chocolate eclair. The child thanked her politely before turning around carefully with the plate balanced in both hands. Then his eyes landed directly on Adrian again. And this time, instead of looking away, the little boy started slowly walking toward him. Adrian Whitmore stopped breathing the moment the little boy began walking toward him. The ballroom around them blurred into soft gold light and distant noise while the child crossed the marble floor, carefully balancing the dessert plate in both hands. Tiny polished shoes tapped quietly against the floor with each step. Adrian could hear them somehow over the orchestra, over the conversations, over the clinking crystal glasses. The boy looked so painfully familiar that it unsettled him down to his bones. Not only the eyes, not only the jawline, even the slight concentration on his face while carrying something important reminded Adrian of childhood photographs his mother used to keep in silver frames at the Whitmore estate. Across the room, Nia noticed her son moving away and immediately straightened slightly. Adrian saw the protective instinct flash through her body before she relaxed again when she realized where the child was heading. Still, her eyes never left him. Calm, watchful, careful. The little boy finally stopped directly in front of Adrian, tilting his head upward politely. Up close, the resemblance became devastating. Adrian's throat tightened so suddenly he almost forgot how to speak. "Hi," the boy said softly. His voice was warm and careful, the kind children develop when raised with gentleness instead of fear. Adrian stared at him for half a second too long before finally answering. "Hello." The boy held out the dessert plate slightly. "They gave me 2 eclairs by accident," he explained seriously. "You can have one if you want." Something inside Adrian nearly broke at the simplicity of it. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar acquisitions with ruthless precision, yet this small act of kindness from a child reduced him to silence. Slowly, Adrian accepted the plate with unsteady fingers. "Thank you," he managed quietly. The boy smiled faintly. "You are welcome." Vanessa watched nearby with growing discomfort, her champagne glass frozen midway to her lips while several guests openly pretended not to stare. Manhattan society could sense emotional disaster from a mile away, and tonight the tension inside the ballroom had become impossible to ignore. Adrian looked down at the child again, struggling to steady his breathing. "What is your name?" The boy shifted his small shoulders proudly. "My name is Elias Brooks." Brooks, not Whitmore. The reality hit Adrian with sharp force despite how obvious it should have been. Elias continued speaking innocently before Adrian could recover. "Mom says it is important to share at charity events." Adrian swallowed hard. Of course she taught him that. He could already hear Nia's voice saying it gently during breakfast mornings or quiet car rides through Manhattan traffic. Adrian glanced toward her across the ballroom. She stood near the donor tables speaking softly with another guest, but her eyes remained fixed on Elias the entire time. Not controlling, not anxious, just attentive in the quiet way mothers become after years of protecting something precious alone. Adrian felt shame rise slowly through him like cold water. 5 years. 5 birthdays. 5 Christmas mornings. 5 years of scraped knees, school photos, bedtime routines, and tiny victories he never knew existed. Elias looked thoughtfully at Adrian's untouched champagne glass before asking, "Do you know my mom?" The question landed softly, but Adrian felt it like a blade sliding carefully between old regrets. He opened his mouth once, closed it again, then finally answered with brutal honesty. "I used to." Elias nodded slowly as if processing that answer with the serious concentration only children possess. "She is really nice," he said after a moment. "She helps people a lot." Adrian's chest tightened painfully. "Yes," he whispered. "She does." The orchestra shifted into a softer jazz melody while camera flashes continued sparkling near the stage behind them. Somewhere across the ballroom, reporters quietly typed updates into their phones. But Adrian noticed none of it anymore, because standing in front of him was the living proof of every terrible choice he had made disguised in a small navy suit and innocent brown eyes. Then Elias smiled politely again and asked the question Adrian Whitmore was least prepared to answer. "Why are you looking at me like you already know me?" The question settled between them so softly that almost nobody nearby noticed it, yet Adrian Whitmore felt it echo through his entire body. Elias stood patiently in front of him, still holding the small dessert plate with one eclair missing. His dark eyes filled with innocent curiosity instead of suspicion. He was too young to understand why a grown man suddenly looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Adrian opened his mouth slowly, searching for an answer that would not betray the storm unraveling inside him. But before he could speak, a familiar voice reached them from across the ballroom. Elias. Nia approached calmly through the crowd, her black satin gown gliding softly against the marble floor while conversations lowered around her once again. The lighting from the crystal chandeliers caught against her skin in warm gold tones, making her look almost unreal beneath the flashes of nearby cameras. Adrian watched her every step now with painful awareness. Years ago, he used to think elegance came from wealth, education, or social status. Tonight, he understood it came from survival. Nia stopped beside Elias and rested one protective hand lightly against his shoulder. "I told you not to wander too far," she said gently. Her tone held no harshness, only quiet care. Elias looked up immediately. "I was sharing my dessert because charity events are about kindness." A faint smile touched Nia's lips. "That sounds exactly like something I would say." Adrian's chest tightened again, hearing the easy warmth between them. Elias glanced between both adults carefully before asking the question again. "Mom, does he know us?" For the first time all evening, silence touched Nia's expression. Not panic, not fear, just the brief stillness of someone deciding how much truth the moment could survive. Around them, wealthy guests pretended not to listen while absolutely listening to everything. Adrian could practically feel attention gathering near them like static electricity. The orchestra continued playing softly in the background while camera flashes sparkled near the press wall, but the air around the three of them had shifted completely. Nia finally looked directly at Adrian again. "Calm, steady, untouchable. Mr. Whitmore and I knew each other a long time ago," she answered carefully. Elias nodded thoughtfully, as if accepting that explanation without question. Children often trusted the emotional tone of adults more than the actual words. And Nia's voice never shook. Adrian stared at her quietly. "Mr. Whitmore." Once she used to whisper his first name like it meant home. Now she spoke to him with the polished distance reserved for strangers in expensive rooms. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward beside Adrian, forcing a sharp smile toward Nia. "Quite an impressive surprise tonight," she said smoothly, though the tension beneath her voice was impossible to miss. Nia met her gaze politely. "I was invited." Vanessa folded one arm lightly across her waist. "I meant the child." The atmosphere around them tightened instantly. Adrian's jaw hardened slightly, while several nearby conversations stopped altogether. But Nia never flinched. She simply looked at Vanessa with the same composed expression she had carried all evening. "Elias is not a surprise," she replied softly. "He is my son. My son. Not ours. Not Adrian's. Mine." The distinction landed sharply inside Adrian's chest. Vanessa gave a tight little laugh, clearly searching for balance again. "Well, he certainly resembles someone in this room." Adrian shot her a warning glance, but the damage was already done. Elias looked upward curiously at Adrian once more, clearly beginning to notice the strange emotional tension around him. Nia sensed it immediately. She crouched gracefully beside her son, smoothing one hand gently against the sleeve of his blazer. "Why do not you go say hello to Mrs. Holloway near the donor table?" she asked softly. "She promised to show you the chocolate fountain." Elias brightened instantly. "Really? Really?" He hugged her quickly around the shoulders before hurrying off excitedly through the crowd. Adrian watched him disappear between marble columns and evening gowns until the child was safely surrounded by event staff again. Then slowly, Nia stood back up and faced Adrian fully for the first time in 5 years. The ballroom lights reflected softly in her dark eyes while distant music floated through the room like smoke. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm enough to destroy him completely. "You should stop staring at him like that, Adrian," she said quietly. "People are starting to figure it out." The moment Nia said his name, Adrian Whitmore felt the room tilt beneath him. Not because her voice was loud. It was barely above a whisper. Calm. Controlled. But hearing Adrian instead of Mr. Whitmore after years of silence struck something buried deep inside him. Around them, the ballroom still glittered with wealth and polished conversation, yet the atmosphere near their corner had sharpened into something fragile and dangerous. A few guests pretended to study the donor wall while secretly listening. Reporters near the stage subtly angled their phones. Manhattan society could smell emotional collapse beneath luxury perfume better than bloodhounds. Adrian lowered his voice instinctively. You knew this would happen tonight. Nia held his gaze without blinking. No, she answered softly. I knew eventually you would see him somewhere. I just did not expect it to happen under chandeliers and cameras. Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose, struggling to steady himself. Why did you never tell me? For the first time all evening, something flickered briefly behind Nia's calm expression. Not guilt. Exhaustion. The kind carried quietly for years. She glanced toward Elias across the ballroom, where he now laughed happily beside the chocolate fountain, while an elderly donor handed him strawberries dipped in chocolate. The sight softened her face instantly before she looked back at Adrian again. Tell you what? She asked carefully. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. Nia. No, she interrupted gently. Say it clearly. The orchestra played softly behind them, while waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays beneath the warm chandelier light. Adrian swallowed hard. He hated that his hands suddenly felt unsteady. Hated that the woman he once considered emotionally weak now stood before him stronger than anyone in the room. You know exactly what I mean. Nia folded her hands lightly in front of her satin gown. Elegant. Untouchable. You want to know why I never called after the divorce? She asked quietly. Why I never showed up at your office crying with ultrasound pictures? Adrian's chest tightened immediately. You were pregnant when you left. It was not a question anymore. Nia looked at him silently for several seconds. Then finally, she nodded once. Adrian felt the air leave his lungs. The ballroom sounds around him faded into distant noise again, while memories crashed through his head with brutal clarity. 5 years ago, their penthouse kitchen, morning sunlight across marble counters. Nia standing near the coffee machine looking pale and distracted while Adrian scrolled through financial projections on his tablet. He remembered speaking without even looking up. The board wants me focused this year. No distractions. No scandals. No family complications. Back then he thought he was discussing strategy, growth, expansion. But now those words returned sounding colder than he ever intended them to be. Adrian rubbed one hand slowly against his jaw. You heard me say that. Nia's expression remained composed, but her eyes darkened slightly with old memory. I heard everything, Adrian. The sentence landed softly between them, yet it carried years inside it. Nearby, Vanessa shifted awkwardly several feet away, clearly realizing this conversation had moved beyond her control entirely. Reporters continued stealing glances toward them now, sensing the emotional gravity gathering beneath the polished surface of the gala. Adrian lowered his voice further. You should have told me anyway. Nia gave the faintest shake of her head. No, I should not have had to beg someone to want his own child. The words cut deeper because she never raised her voice while saying them. No anger. No performance. Just truth spoken calmly beneath crystal chandeliers and expensive lights. Adrian looked away briefly toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. The city glittered endlessly outside in silver and gold reflections. For years he believed success looked exactly like that view. Untouchable towers. Power. Reputation. Influence. But standing beside Nia now, Adrian realized success meant absolutely nothing if the people you loved no longer trusted you enough to stay. Then suddenly another burst of camera flashes exploded near the ballroom entrance as several reporters hurried toward the donor tables, whispering excitedly. One journalist lifted her phone toward Adrian and Nia before asking loudly enough for half the room to hear. Mr. Whitmore, is the child Ms. Brooks brought tonight your son? The question sliced through the ballroom so sharply that even the orchestra seemed quieter afterward. Camera flashes erupted almost instantly near the donor tables, while conversations collapsed into whispers around the room. Reporters moved closer with the smooth aggression of people trained to smell headlines before they fully existed. Mr. Whitmore, is Elias Brooks your son? Another journalist repeated louder this time. Adrian Whitmore felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward him at once. Investors, socialites, politicians, fashion executives. People who had spent years studying his carefully controlled image now watched him with open curiosity. For the first time, 5 years ago Adrian would have handled a moment like this flawlessly. A polished statement. a strategic smile, controlled damage management. But tonight his chest felt too tight for rehearsed answers. Beside him, Nia remained completely still beneath the warm chandelier light. No panic crossed her face. No embarrassment. She simply looked toward the reporters calmly, one hand resting lightly against the satin fabric near her waist while the flashes reflected softly in her dark eyes. Adrian realized then that she was not afraid of public judgment anymore, because she had already survived worse in private. Across the ballroom, Elias remained blissfully unaware near the chocolate fountain, while an elderly donor laughed warmly at something he said. The innocence of the scene nearly shattered Adrian completely. "Ms. Brooks," a reporter pressed carefully, "would you like to respond?" Nia glanced briefly toward Elias before answering with measured calm. "I do not discuss my son's private life with the media." The sentence was elegant and firm enough to silence several reporters immediately, but one younger journalist stepped forward anyway. "So you are not denying the resemblance?" Adrian's jaw tightened instinctively. Before Nia could answer, Vanessa suddenly laughed softly beside him, though the sound carried tension underneath it. "People are making assumptions over a child having similar eyes. That hardly proves anything." Nia slowly turned her gaze toward Vanessa. Not hostile, not emotional, just quiet enough to make Vanessa immediately regret speaking. "Children are not scandals," Nia said softly, "and they are certainly not talking points for uncomfortable women at charity events." Several nearby guests lowered their eyes to hide smiles, while Vanessa's expression stiffened visibly. Adrian stared at Nia in stunned silence. 5 years ago, she would have avoided conflict entirely. Tonight, she handled humiliation with surgical grace. The reporters immediately sensed the shift and pressed closer again. "Mr. Whitmore, did you know about the child?" Adrian opened his mouth, but no polished answer came, because the truth standing inside his chest was too heavy to disguise anymore. No, he did not know. He did not know about first steps or preschool orientation or bedtime stories or doctor appointments or the sound of his son laughing. And suddenly, every boardroom victory from the last 5 years felt hollow compared to that absence. Adrian finally looked directly toward the reporters, his voice lower than usual. "Tonight is not about me." It was the first honest public statement he had made in years. The ballroom quieted again. Nia studied him carefully, almost as if she did not entirely recognize the man standing beside her anymore. Then another flash exploded nearby, and one reporter asked the question Adrian feared most. "If Elias is your son, why were you never involved in his life?" The silence afterward felt brutal. Adrian could hear the soft clinking of champagne glasses from distant tables, could hear fabric shifting as guests leaned closer pretending not to. He turned slowly toward Nia, pain visible in his eyes for the first time all evening. "You never gave me the chance," he said quietly. Nia's expression did not harden. Somehow that hurt worse. She simply looked at him with exhausted sadness instead of anger. "No, Adrian," she replied softly enough that only those closest could hear. "You lost the chance long before I ever left." The words settled into him like cold rain. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly, unable to fight the truth buried inside her voice. Because deep down he knew exactly what she meant. The night she walked out of the penthouse carrying nothing except quiet heartbreak, he had believed he was protecting his future. But standing beneath the glittering lights of Manhattan's elite now, Adrian Whitmore finally understood the devastating reality. He had not protected his future at all. He had abandoned it. The ballroom never fully recovered after that moment. Even as the orchestra continued playing beneath the chandeliers and waiters resumed weaving through the crowd, with silver trays balanced carefully in gloved hands, the atmosphere had changed permanently. Every whispered conversation now carried Adrian Whitmore's name alongside Nia Brooks and the little boy with his eyes. Reporters clustered near the donor tables pretending professionalism while secretly hoping for another emotional crack in the evening's polished surface. Adrian barely noticed any of it anymore. He stood frozen beneath the golden lights with Nia's final sentence repeating endlessly through his mind. "You lost the chance long before I ever left." The terrifying part was that she was right. 5 years ago, Adrian believed love could survive neglect as long as luxury surrounded it. He thought expensive apartments, private flights, and designer gifts compensated for emotional absence. Standing here tonight watching Nia move calmly through the ballroom without him, He realized how disastrously wrong he had been. Across the room, Elias laughed brightly while Mrs. Holloway helped him stack strawberries beneath the chocolate fountain. The sound reached Adrian unexpectedly through the noise around him, warm and genuine enough to tighten his throat again. He tried imagining what that laugh sounded like inside a home at night. Tried imagining tiny footsteps running across hardwood floors on Christmas morning. Tried imagining bedtime stories and sleepy hugs and school recitals. Entire years existed behind that child's smile that Adrian would never get back. Vanessa touched his arm carefully. "Adrian," she whispered, tension sharpening her voice. "We should leave before this gets worse." Adrian slowly turned toward her as though waking from somewhere far away. Worse. The word felt strangely empty now. 5 years ago, public embarrassment would have terrified him. Headlines mattered. Image mattered. Tonight, none of it felt heavier than the quiet truth standing across the ballroom, wearing a black satin gown and protecting a little boy alone for half a decade. "Go home, Vanessa," Adrian said quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. "You are serious?" Adrian looked back toward Nia again. "Yes." Vanessa studied him for several long seconds before finally releasing a brittle laugh beneath her breath. "You still love her?" Adrian did not answer because silence admitted enough. Vanessa picked up her clutch from the nearby table, straightened her silver gown, and walked away without another word. Adrian barely watched her leave. Years ago, he might have chased after appearances. Tonight, he only felt tired. The orchestra shifted into a slower melody while Manhattan's skyline shimmered beyond the ballroom windows in silver reflections. Adrian loosened his tie slightly for the first time all evening, suddenly aware that he could not remember the last time he had truly breathed without pressure crushing his chest. Then his phone vibrated sharply inside his jacket pocket. He ignored it once. It vibrated again immediately. Irritated, Adrian finally glanced at the screen. 7 missed messages from his public relations director. 4 from board members. 2 from financial reporters requesting statements. The internet was already exploding. Adrian slid the phone back into his pocket without replying. For once, the market could wait. Across the ballroom, Nia finally guided Elias toward one of the quieter balcony corridors away from the crowd. The little boy yawned softly while rubbing one tired eye with his fist, and Nia immediately bent down to button his jacket more carefully against the cool draft coming from the open terrace doors. Adrian watched the tenderness of the moment with painful fascination. She noticed everything about her son automatically. The chill in the air, the exhaustion in his eyes, the tiny details Adrian never even had the opportunity to learn. Then suddenly Nia glanced back toward the ballroom, and their eyes met once more across the distance. This time there was no anger in her expression at all. Only exhaustion, and something else hidden quietly beneath it. Sadness. Not for herself. For him. Adrian felt that realization settle heavily inside his chest, because pity from Nia Brooks somehow hurt more than hatred ever could. Slowly, she guided Elias toward the private terrace doors overlooking Manhattan's lights. Adrian hesitated only 1 second before following after them. Cold night air wrapped around Adrian Whitmore the moment he stepped through the terrace doors behind them. The noise of the ballroom softened instantly into distant music and muffled conversation, while Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the balcony and rivers of silver light and glowing windows. Below the Grand Astoria Hotel, traffic crawled through the city like ribbons of gold beneath the midnight sky. Nia stood near the terrace railing with Elias bundled sleepily against her side, one small arm draped around her shoulders while his eyes fluttered with exhaustion. The gentle wind moved softly through the loose curls near her face as she adjusted her son's jacket again with automatic care. Adrian stopped several feet away, suddenly uncertain of himself for the first time in years. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without hesitation. He had stood before hostile media storms and political investigations with perfect composure. Yet standing on this quiet terrace beside the woman he once loved felt infinitely harder than all of it combined. Nia noticed him immediately, but did not tell him to leave. That alone felt like more grace than he deserved. Elias rested his head sleepily against her shoulder before mumbling, "Mom, I am tired." Nia brushed her fingers gently across his curls. "I know, baby. We are leaving soon." The tenderness in her voice hit Adrian with painful force again. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary, natural. The kind of softness built slowly through years of showing up for someone every single day. Adrian realized with quiet devastation that Nia had become the exact kind of parent he never allowed himself to imagine becoming. Elias finally lifted sleepy eyes toward Adrian once more. "Good night, mister," he whispered politely. Adrian swallowed hard. "Good night, Elias." The little boy smiled faintly before closing his eyes against Nia's shoulder, trusting her completely to carry him through the world safely. Adrian watched the scene silently until Nia finally spoke without looking at him. "You should go back inside before the reporters follow you out here." Adrian stared at the skyline beyond her shoulder. "I do not care about reporters right now." Nia gave a faint, humorless smile. "That is new." The sentence landed softly, but Adrian accepted it because he deserved worse. Wind swept lightly across the terrace again, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far below in the city streets. Adrian loosened his tie slowly, exhaustion finally visible across his face. "I thought I was protecting my future back then," he admitted quietly. Nia remained silent. "The investors, the board, the image. Everyone kept telling me what a successful man was supposed to look like." His voice lowered further. "And I listened to them more than I listened to you." Nia's eyes stayed fixed on the skyline. "Yes," she answered softly. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "I loved you." This time Nia looked at him fully. Not shocked, just sad. "I know you did." The honesty of her response nearly broke him more than anger would have. Adrian stepped slightly closer, careful not to wake Elias sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "Then why does it feel like I destroyed everything anyway?" Nia studied him quietly beneath the cold Manhattan lights. For the first time all evening, the distance between them no longer felt angry, just tired, wounded, human. "Because love without courage damages people," she said softly. "And back then you were too afraid of losing status to protect the people who loved you most." Adrian lowered his eyes. Every word was true. He remembered all the moments clearly now. Investors making subtle comments about appearances. Old money families treating Nia like decoration instead of equal. Business partners questioning whether Adrian's marriage fit the image of Whitmore Capital's expansion into elite circles. And instead of defending her, he slowly let those opinions reshape the way he treated the woman waiting for him at home every night. Adrian looked at Elias sleeping safely in her arms and felt shame settle deeper inside him than ever before. "I missed his whole life," he whispered. Nia's expression softened slightly then, though sadness remained in her eyes. "No," she corrected gently. "You missed the beginning of it." Adrian looked up at her instantly. The meaning behind that sentence hit him with terrifying hope. But before he could speak, Nia carefully shifted Elias higher against her shoulder and quietly added, "Do not mistake possibility for forgiveness, Adrian." The wind carried the distant sound of traffic through the terrace while Adrian Whitmore stood motionless beneath the Manhattan skyline, trying to absorb the fragile possibility hidden inside Nia's words. "Do not mistake possibility for forgiveness." 5 years ago, Adrian would have searched immediately for leverage inside a sentence like that. Strategy. Advantage. Tonight, all he heard was truth wrapped carefully around pain. Nia shifted Elias gently against her shoulder as the little boy slept peacefully beside her, his small hand curled loosely against the satin fabric of her gown. Adrian watched the scene quietly, realizing he had spent most of his adult life chasing power while completely misunderstanding what strength actually looked like. It looked like a woman standing alone beneath cold city lights after rebuilding herself from heartbreak without asking anyone to rescue her. The terrace doors opened briefly behind them as distant laughter spilled from the ballroom before fading again. Somewhere inside, investors still discussed markets and acquisitions beneath crystal chandeliers. Cameras still flashed. Reporters still waited for statements. Yet for the first time in his life, Adrian felt no desire to return to any of it. Nia adjusted Elias more carefully in her arms before finally speaking again. "He likes astronomy," she said softly without looking at Adrian. The unexpectedness of the sentence caught him off guard. "What?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Elias. He likes astronomy. He memorizes constellations faster than I can." Adrian stared at her quietly. "I used to love astronomy when I was a kid." "I know," Nia replied gently. "That is why I bought him the telescope." Adrian felt emotion tighten painfully in his throat. She remembered things he had forgotten about himself. Little details buried beneath years of board meetings and headlines. He suddenly remembered standing beside her once on the roof of their old Chicago apartment before the money became enormous and the pressure became unbearable. Back then they used to sit wrapped in blankets drinking cheap coffee while Adrian pointed out constellations across the winter sky. Nia used to laugh every time he mixed up the names. The memory hit him so suddenly that he had to look away toward the skyline to steady himself. "You still remember that?" he asked quietly. Nia's expression softened with something almost sad. "I remember everything, Adrian." Silence settled between them again, but this time it no longer felt hostile. Only honest. The kind of silence that appears after years of pretending finally collapse. Adrian slowly stepped closer, careful not to disturb Elias sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I cannot change what I did," he admitted quietly. "I cannot undo 5 years." Nia nodded once. "No, you cannot." Adrian lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. "But if there is even the smallest chance to know him, to show up now, I will spend the rest of my life earning it." Nia studied him for several long seconds beneath the cold silver glow of the city lights. Adrian did not look like the untouchable billionaire from magazine covers anymore. The sharp perfection had cracked tonight. What stood before her now was simply a man finally forced to confront the emptiness success could not hide. Then slowly, Nia shifted Elias slightly and reached into the small satin clutch resting beside her on the terrace chair. She pulled out a folded piece of paper worn softly at the edges from years of being opened and closed. Adrian recognized his own handwriting instantly before she even handed it to him. His chest tightened. It was an old note from nearly 6 years ago, one he had left absent-mindedly beside her coffee mug before an overseas business trip. "I know I forget to say it sometimes, but you make every place feel like home." Adrian stared at the paper in stunned silence. "Why do you still have this?" Nia looked out across Manhattan's glowing skyline. "Because before everything became about status and appearances," she answered softly, "there was a version of you who loved me gently." Adrian felt tears threaten for the first time in years. Real tears. Not from public pressure or financial stress. From grief. From regret. From finally understanding the cost of becoming the man he thought the world wanted him to be. Nia carefully adjusted Elias against her shoulder one last time before walking slowly toward the terrace doors. Just before stepping inside, she paused briefly beneath the soft golden light spilling from the ballroom behind her. "If you want to know your son," she said quietly without turning around, "then learn how to become someone he would be proud of first." Then she disappeared back into the glittering ballroom carrying their sleeping child in her arms, leaving Adrian Whitmore alone beneath the Manhattan sky, with nothing except the cold night air, a worn piece of paper trembling in his hand, and the devastating realization that the woman he once believed was not enough for his world had become the only thing in it that ever truly mattered.